Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl. And we're continuing with our Dark Elf faction focus. And we're now coming to the last two episodes of our faction focus, and that is going to be the legendary lords and heroes. Now, as with the previous videos, we are looking at the 8th edition army book, looking at the rules and the flavour of those characters and units in the 8th edition, to see how they might influence the faction and those units in Warhammer The Old World. We do know that the developers are looking at previous editions, and a flavour and fluff of a unit, you'd expect it to be reasonably consistent. While the rules themselves, the detail might change, the flavour of how they play should be quite similar. Now, I've done the legendary lords and heroes last because I have no idea if they're going to include rules for these units or not. They are... some of the factions, legendary heroes and lords, will be alive during the time period that the Old World is set in. Some will not, for various reasons. They're either not alive yet or they were killed off. But take, for example, the Dark Elves. We know they're not a faction that's in the narrative. We know they're going to get rules. We know those rules are going to be in a legendary style format where they're going to get one set of rules upon release and then they won't be updated going forwards, at least not in the first edition. So based on that, I thought for completeness, we'll introduce the legendary lords and heroes of the faction, what they were like, how they played, a bit of a fluff about them as well, though this is not a lore channel or an in-depth lore look. We'll do a few bullet points about who the character is and kind of what it is about them, and then how that looks in their rules. So, to start off with, we're going to be looking at the legendary lords of the Dark Elves. So, first up, and with no surprise, it is Malekith himself, Malekith the Witch King, and you can see his quite old model there on the right hand side, riding on his black dragon Seraphon, and that is the original, that is the last incarnation we saw of Malekith the Witch King. So he is the supreme ruler of Naggaroth. He did try to claim Ulthuan's crown. He burnt, however, in the flames of Azurion, and sparked at the end the Elven Civil War, which then split into what we know as the High Elves and Dark Elves, the Dark Elves being led by Malekith. He's tried many times to invade Ulthuan, but has, to this point, failed. However, he is immortal, he knows he's got time, and he knows that many of his enemies will be dead by the time in years to come, and he will continue to do anything to regain that throne in Ulthuan. He does have a rich and interesting story, and there's actually about 3 books, if I remember, dedicated to that early story of Malekith, and thoroughly recommend you give it a read. I do like him and the fluff as a character of how he came to be and the influences of him from other people. But without further ado, let's look at him as a lord on the battlefield. Now, this is among, we call legendary lords for the Dark Elves, but this is amongst the most legendary lords in all of Warhammer Fantasy. So we can expect something quite significant from him. Stats: high weapon skill and ballistic skill. He does have his typically low strength, toughness and wounds that you get from a Dark Elf character. However, he is supplemented by a Black Dragon mount. Equipment-wise, he's got 4 magic items. He comes with Destroyer as his weapon. This is a magic weapon, and at the start of the close combat phase, all enemies in base contact must reveal all their magical items. If Malekith hits, he then rolls a d6, and on a 4+, one random magic item is destroyed, wiped from the game. And then in addition, any wizard that takes a wound loses 1 wizard level on a 4+. Quite potent. Though not particularly damaging, can really impact because some characters are built upon the magic items they're given. You know, I remember things like the Hydra Sword or whatever it was that gave a whole bunch of attacks. Take that away from certain characters and they really lost their potency. He comes with the Armour of Midnight. Gives him a 5+ armour save. That's nothing special, but remember he is riding a mount, so that is increased. But he gets a 2+ ward save against all non-magical attacks. Alright, so anything that's not magical, he's got a 2+ ward save. On top of that, he ignores Killing Blow. So he can never be struck with Killing Blow. And anything that has multiple wounds, he can only suffer a single wound against each attack. Very, very durable. Now, he also has the Supreme Spell Shield. This is a 5+ ward save against spells, and a successful dispel. The caster's unit suffers D6 Strength 6 magic hits. So if you target Malekith with a spell and he dispels it, the caster's unit will suffer D6 Strength 6 magic hits. Pretty nasty. So it does make it a real risk to target him with spells, especially given that he's a level 4 wizard. Circlet of Iron. Once per magic phase, he can add 1 bonus dice to casting or dispel attempt, and that can also generate irresistible force or even a miscast in that case. So if you think about it, again, that targeting him with a spell, he's going to get a +1 bonus dice to the dispel attempt, and if he beats you and dispels your spell, you're going to take those D6 Strength 6 magic hits. Pretty potent. Now, he is pictured nearly all the time on his Black Dragon, which is named Seraphon, but he could also have been mounted on a Cold One or a Cold One chariot. He is a level 4 wizard, and he does only use dark magic spells. Now, Seraphon even has his own special rules section. So he's got Hatred High Elves, he flies, he's a large target. He does have a Noxious Breath weapon, Strength 4, template weapon. 1 or more casualties will mean that a unit suffers -1 weapon skill and ballistic skill until the end of the following turn. He's got 3+ scaly skin, and he causes terror. So that's just the dragon. Now, Malekith himself gets the usual rules of always strike first, the eternal hatred rule that we see on the Black Guard, which means you get hatred, which is the re-roll all misses, but that applies in all rounds of close combat, not just the first. So he's re-rolling all misses in all rounds of close combat, and he has murderous prowess, so he re-rolls wound rolls of 1 in close combat. So while his strength might not be the highest, he's definitely going to be hitting and wounding in most cases. He's immune to psychology, as you'd expect. He has absolute power, so he must be the army general. But his inspiring presence, i.e. using his leadership, is 18 inches or 24 if he's riding Seraphon. He does cause fear himself, and he also gets Hecate's blessing, so he's also getting +1 to cast dark magic. So, as you can expect, he's an absolute beast of a character, but he is quite difficult to justify. So, riding Seraphon, he's nearly half a 2,000 point army cost. He's nearly 50% of the army, not quite, but nearly. If he's not riding Seraphon, he's still 25% of a 2,000 point army, right? But then he has toughness 4 and 3 wounds, which even with a 2+ ward save won't last long if you've got lots of low strength attacks, right? Because you're just forcing to take saves, you're eventually going to roll those ones. He was mainly taken for narrative purposes in my local area, though I think of the super-powered, super expensive legendary lords, Malekith does offer that great utility and flexibility over some of the others. The strong magic, the strong close combat while on the dragon, the dragon's attacks, the breath attack on top of Malekith ones, Malekith getting the always strike first, the fact he can destroy the magic item or reduce the wizard level, he can fly on the dragon, did make him quite flexible. it's just his points cost made him very hard to justify. And would you really want to take him without his dragon? Probably not. And that's when it becomes really tough to justify him. So a beast of a character, but with the points cost to match. Next up from the Legendary Lords is Morathi, the famous Morathi, known as the Hag Sorceress of Grond. And you can see Morathi there. That's her second model there, where she is riding her Dark Pegasus Sulafet. So, Morathi, who is she? She's the Phoenix King Anarian's wife, and also the mother to Malekith, and she did teach him all he knows in statecraft and magic. She's absolutely instrumental and manipulative in pushing Malekith to obtain the crown of Ulthuan in the first place, which led to him going into the flames of Azurion, but she continues to push him in that direction. She's always there to support Malekith, so like if he's starting to falter, she'll fan the hatred in his heart, and also, you know, if anyone challenges him or betrays him, no one will fight harder to restore his rule. She does prefer the manipulation and assassination over direct conflict, though certainly if force is required, she is capable of some of the most destructive magics possible when unleashing the powers of chaos. So the epitome of a, you know, superpowered supreme sorceress in that regard, with decades of centuries of wisdom to back it up. So moving on to this very powerful wizard, what have we got? So Morathi then. So she's got very high movement because of her Dark Pegasus and good leadership, and a typical low strength, toughness and wounds. Equipment wise, not much. She comes with Heartrender and Dark Sword, which essentially is paired weapons which come with Killing Blow. She does get +2 strength on the charge. And characters and monsters reduce their attacks, strength, and toughness by 1 for each unsaved wound, and that does last for the remainder of the game. However, while she would do that to a character and monster, and she does get the Always Strikes first, she doesn't have that much durability if that monster attacks back. So she does come with a Dark Pegasus, which is Sulafet. She's a level 4 wizard, and she can do Dark Magic, Death Magic, and Shadow Magic. So she gets the basic abilities of all sort of Dark Elves. The Hecate's Blessing does give her the +1 to cast for Dark Magic, meaning that you are going to get that bonus to your Dark Magic. So taking Death Magic and Shadow Magic, you're losing out on that. She flies. Enchanting Beauty. Start of close combat phase, you take a leadership test. If you fail, you're at -5 weapon skill until the end of the round. But it doesn't affect anyone who's immune to psychology. So, you know, if you are going to go against a character and monster, you need to make sure you know if they're immune to psychology or not. And, you know, monsters are probably easier to go after in that regard. But, you know, the +2 strength and the charge, you're still not going to have massive strength to go after toughness. Characters are going to have typically high leadership, so they're probably not going to fail the leadership test. So she's not exactly someone you're going to be running around trying to get in combat with. Sulafet does get an Impale attack, which is +1 strength when charging. But her real thing is in magic here, and as the first sorceress, she gets +D3 to all casting attempts. So, you know, magic is her thing. 1001 Dark Blessings also give her a 4+ ward save and a magic resistance 2 on top of that, meaning she has a 2+ ward save against magic or against spells. She's basically a superpowered supreme sorceress. She only costs 65 points more than a supreme sorceress also mounted on a Dark Pegasus. She's not seen a great deal, though, in my area. I've talked about the meta before being large infantry blocks and so on. And people would prefer to take, for 65 points less, and in fact a lot more than that, because you're now getting rid of the Dark Pegasus, is you take your Supreme Sorceress on foot and you hide her in a large infantry unit or a Dark Shard unit. So I think she's the best value for points of a legendary lord in the Dark Elf roster, especially given how potent magic was in the 8th edition. So she definitely, if you were going to pick a legendary lord, she'd definitely be up there for the pick. Malekith's a beast, no doubt, but is he really the value for that amount of points? Whereas I think Morathi is probably the best one in that legendary lord category in terms of value for points. But with the meta and the way the 8th edition played, you would hide her in infantry. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in the old world. Is it going to be hiding characters on foot in infantry units? Is there going to be more of a focus on getting them on their monsters and characters running around solo, which is what I would prefer. I prefer that to these big Death Star units. I want to see Morathi on her Pegasus. I want to see people riding their dragons and everything else. For me, that's kind of what makes Warhammer not just massive blocks of infantry. You can go and play historical games for that sort of thing. So I hope we see more of these characters running around on their monsters, in which case that could be an interesting take for Morathi if she's in the rules. But you certainly can expect her to be a beast when it comes to magic. Next up, we've got Helebron, the Blood Queen of Harganeth. And you can see the model there. That is Helebron. And that essentially is the model that comes with a cauldron of blood. So the most ancient Hag Queen and second only to Morathi in Kane's sight. She must bathe in blood in her cauldron to restore her youth and beauty. So she's basically getting old and ugly, and she has to keep bathing in blood. So every time she does this, the effect lasts less and less each time. So then she has to spend months hiding away. She hates Morathi with a passion, and that's because Morathi will not share the deepest secret of the cauldron, which is giving everlasting youth and beauty, which is what Morathi has. The ritual itself is called Death Night. It takes place in Harganeth, and it's where many people are sacrificed to fill that cauldron with blood that then Helebron then bathes in. She's certainly the most skilled of all the Hag Queens, and essentially is the ultimate witch elf. And her combat skills do far surpass Morathi, who is obviously often taken away and focused on her magic abilities as opposed to the combat. She does lead the unholy rites of Kane. Essentially, she's the high priestess of Kane in that way, and she dictates the holy creed that all witch elves must follow as well. So that's kind of the few bullet points about who Helebron is. But then let's look at how she plays. High weapon skill and ballistic skill. She does have low strength, toughness and wounds, but massively boosted by a Cauldron of Blood or Manticore. Equipment wise, she does come with a Death Sword and the Cursed Blade, which is a pair of weapons. Strength 10, and enemy models who roll a 1 to hit in close combat suffer a Strength 4 hit for each roll of 1. So every time somebody attacks her, every 1 they roll, they get a Strength 4 hit in return. She also has the Amulet of Dark Fire, which gives her a +4 bonus to Dispel, which is quite a lot. She can be mounted on a Manticore or a Cauldron of Blood. And if we look at a Cauldron of Blood, that gives her a 4+ ward save. It gives a 5+ ward save to an attached unit of Witch Elves, of which she can join on a Cauldron of Blood. It also gives +2 attacks to Witch Elf Frenzy instead of the normal +1. So you now got Witch Elves running around with 3 attacks, and she's also getting that extra attack as well. And re-roll failed wound rolls. So, yeah, if you're going to take Helebron, you're going to put her on a Cauldron of Blood, and you're going to put her in a unit of Witch Elves, without doubt. And that'll give them huge amounts of bite. She also gets all 3 gifts of Cain, which is what you'd see on the Hag Queens. You can choose one, but Hellebrand gets them all, which is you get -3 leadership to enemy units. She causes fear. She gains plus D3 attacks, and also gets the +2 attacks. Now, the important thing to note here is that Gift of Cain that gives the Frenzy +2 attacks does not stack with Cauldron of Blood. So you're not getting an additional attack on top of it. You only get the +2, so you can't stack it. Special rules, always strike first, hatred and murderous prowess. She gets frenzy and poison attacks. So, yeah, I mean, overall, she's going to be a beat stick in combat. Right? That's what Hellebrand is all about. She's the ultimate witch elf. The advantage she gains is the durability of the Cauldron of Blood. So you get kind of like a Death Star style unit, the Cauldron of Blood with Hellebrand and the Witch Elves, maximize the buffs. However, Hellebrand on the Cauldron of Blood is like 25% already of a 2,000 point army. She needs to get in combat to do anything of value. And a unit like that with Hellebrand and a Cauldron of Blood and Witch Elves is going to be the target of everything on the tabletop. And, they get a 5+ ward save, but that's not, that's not a lot if you become the target of a whole host of spells and shooting and everything else. But, with 6+ D3 attacks that are strength 10 on top of the Cauldron of Blood attacks, on top of the buff Witch Elves, with high initiative and always strikes first, no one's going to want to fight that unit in close combat. Without a doubt, that is a unit that even if you charge it, they're going to fight first. They've got high initiative. It's a unit that if they charge you, it's just going to chew you up. But that unit's going to be the focus of everybody's attention. So a lot of expense for not the most durable of units. That's going to be the target of everything, which is why I prefer Morathi for the value for points than Hellebrand. Malice Darkblade, next up, Seeing of Hagrief, or Grafe. He came about following the books, the Malice Darkblade books, which are fantastic. Recommend you read them. There's 5 of them, and they're really, really good. Just a few points out of that. He's the youngest child of the Volcar of Haggrafe. He thirst for power because he was the youngest child. He didn't really have any power, so he had a thirst for power, and basically put him on a quest that led him deep into the realm of chaos. And he actually, he is skillful and incredibly determined. With his, moniker being, with hate, all things are possible. He did survive, and he did reach the Temple of Kul Hadar, which is where the great power was, and that power was found to be a bound demon, essentially. Unfortunately, Malice messed up, and he let the demon Zarkan escape, and then subsequently possess him. So his life and soul were now forfeit, and he basically had 1 year to find 5 artifacts that would free Zarkan from his prison, and then Darkblade's soul would be restored. If he didn't do it within 1 year, he'd have to serve the demon for eternity. Now, Malice, through his determination and skill, he actually succeeded. He gathered all the artifacts, but he was tricked. So when he released Zarkan, Zarkan comes out of his prison, and he stole Malice's soul, and they were now forever intertwined. So, with that in mind, how does he play? So, in 8th edition, Malice Darkblade, he had good weapon skill and ballistic skill, initiative, leadership. His low strength, toughness, and wounds were boosted by the fact he was always riding his cold one by the name of Spite, which is a special cold one. Equipment-wise, he had heavy armor and a Sea Dragon cloak. So, Sea Dragon cloak is scaly skin 5+. Heavy armor is also 5+. So, that takes you. Plus the fact that you've got the cold one, which has thick skin, so he gets +2 save, incredibly good armor save. He also has the Warp Sword of Cain. This is a magic weapon. Re-roll all failed wound rolls, and there's no armor saves against it, so that's not bad. He's mounted on Spite, which is a special cold one, and with the armor and the cloak, he gets basically a 1+ armor save. Special rules, all the standard ones, and standard for a cold one knight. thick-skinned, fear, and so on. But spite is not just a dumb brute, and that was the whole thing in the book. He actually chose spite as a cold one who was essentially one of the smallest of the cold ones, but actually was very clever. And as a result, spite himself is not subject to stupidity, but more importantly, the unit that Malice Darkblade, so if Malice joins a unit of Cold One Knights, they're not subject to stupidity either. Now that's key. Spite also gets the Eternal Hatred benefit as well. So rather than in a lot of cases only the rider gets the Eternal Hatred, in this case Spite also gets the Eternal Hatred, which is the re-rolling all misses in all rounds of close combat. Now Zarkan, this is the demon that's possessed Malice, so at the start of any movement phase, the demon can be released, but once you release it, can't put him away. So once he's out, you're playing demonized Malice for the rest of the game. Now, what does that give you? Essentially, it gives you Frenzy, which is good, but if you do get unlucky and fail a leadership test, that's going to be a problem. You get +1 weapon skill, strength, toughness, and initiative. That's great. However, the downside here is each hit roll of 1 that Malice makes, he hits a friendly model in base contact with Malice. At Malice's strength, which means he's going to get the +1 strength from the demon, and a failed wound roll must be re-rolled. So you have to roll at least twice on the wound. And there's no armor save allowed. So even if you're with a unit of Cold One Knights who are very durable, they don't get that armor save. So that's a problem. You know, it's a good buff, but it's a risky buff, and that means you're not going to be having that for most of the game because you're going to have to really want that buff to make it worth the risk. I mean, he's best taken in a unit of Cold One Knights. You're never going to run him on his own, specifically when he gives a Cold One Knight unit, they removes their stupidity. He's quite expensive, and the main ability can be a liability for the unit he's with. And that's why he wasn't really seen, is because in general it was better to have a generic Lord and equip him. You could put a generic Lord on a cold one still, equip him with a bunch of magic items, which made him more flexible. So unless you are leaning heavily into a large unit of Cold One Knights and you want to take away the risk of stupidity for such a high points cost, or you're playing a narrative-focused battle, Malice wasn't really seen as much. And that's why, again, out of all the legendary lords, I would say Marathi was the one that, if I was going to pick one, that's the one that I would pick overall in a 2,000-point game. Once you can start going to massive point games, yeah, you can pretty much take any of them. And, of course, you'd probably take Malekith. I just find his points cost, that at that amount of points, he almost never makes that much back, whereas Marathi has a good chance with her magic to do so. And there we go, guys. That is the end of this episode of the Dark Elf Legendary Lords. There's one final episode to go in this faction focus, which is the Legendary Heroes, before we start preparing for another faction focus. And I do encourage you to watch my video on the current channel status to find out what upcoming content is coming for the channel. If you like this video, though, give it a thumbs up. And if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down and let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, please hit that subscribe button. Totally free for you to do. It means a lot for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. Tune back in for the last episode of this Dark Elf faction focus. And I'll see you all very soon.